podcast. He is Tiki Man.
I'm H.B. Burlow, the historical crime fiction author of the Wichita Chronicles, with Book 2, The End of the Treachery, being released on December 9th, 2024. And across the way is The Viking.
I am the Viking. I am William Bryan Johnson, author of Hell to Pay, The Dark Cry of Aristed, and soon to be released, Middle-Aged Man in a Trash Can.
That's not a bio, is it?
Yeah, you know, I think it works for me.
You know, for years I remember everybody and their mother talking about, show don't tell, the writing tools, and I always talked about a great first line that would capture people's attention. And there are lists, the 100 greatest first lines in history. And the thing that I found most frustrating is to force a young author or a starting author to come up with a great first line is nigh upon impossible. But you can write a great first paragraph that will capture people's attention.
What is it? I think originally we were told we have the first couple pages to grab the reader's attention, and then when attention spans went to the size of gnats, we have like the first paragraph now.
Yeah, or the first couple of words. Once upon a...
Yeah. I'm already shut the book and it's back on the plate.
So we've found, between us, and we write different genres, we have different reading interests, we found a couple of examples of opening paragraphs from books that grab us. And we're going to talk about what those paragraphs are. We're going to read them and then talk about what they mean to us and how they impact us.
Ooh, I'm going to go first.
Why don't you go first then? What book are you going to be reading from?
This book is Blood Rights. This is book 6 of the Dresden Files, which Jim Butcher we may see next year at OWFI.
He'll be the keynote speaker.
Yeah.
We'd love to not only see him, but maybe talk with him.
Love
and maybe
to talk
giving
to
him.
him.
Well, we'll find out what happens.
See how that happens. But chapter 1, I mean, this was probably one of my favorite opening lines. The building was on fire and it wasn't my fault.
Read the rest of the paragraph, why don't you?
Okay. My butt slipped and slid on the tile floor as I sprinted around the corner and toward the exit doors to the abandoned school building on the southwest edge of Chicagoland. Distant streetlights provided the only light in the dusty hall, and huge swaths of blackness crouching in the old classroom doors. So what this sets up for is a big box of puppies he's trying to rescue from a demon. And actually sets up a character that happens in later books.
So it starts off extremely dramatic, but it's about a box of
Puppies.
puppies.
Mm-hmm. But these are special puppies.
Of course, because it's the Dresden Files.
Yes, and these are Tibetan Mastiffs, which if you know anything about the Dresden Files, they were the guardians of the temple.
Wow.
And these may be a special box of Tibetan Mastiffs.
Okay, from your perspective, though, as a writer, why is that paragraph strong? What does it do?
Just the first line of this, the building's on fire and it wasn't my fault. If you have any knowledge of Dresden and essentially what happens to him in the books, he has so much working against him that, the building's on fire and it wasn't my fault is just an extremely natural line. And it's perfect for the book.
Excellent. Well, I've got, I'm of course, I write crime fiction, so obviously my...
that looks like Raymond Chandler.
That would be Raymond Chandler, The Big Sleep.
Ah.
That was Raymond Chandler's first book. And for me, that it identifies the main character in one paragraph.
Good.
It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, mid-October, with the sun not shining, and a look of hard, wet rain in the clearness of the foothills. I was wearing my powder blue suit with dark blue shirt, tie, and display handkerchief, black brogues, black wool socks with dark blue clocks on them. I was neat, clean, shaved, and sober, and I didn't care who knew it. I was everything the well-dressed private detective ought to be. I was calling on $4 million.
Ooh, okay.
So, I mean, Chandler was, for me, mostly about style over substance. He always identified the weather in Southern California. He always identified what people were wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular case, saying that you were neat, shaved, and sober and not caring who knew about it was indicative of the fact that he was usually not well-shaved and usually not sober. And the fact that he was calling on $4 million for 1939.
Yeah, definitely piques the interest of what's going on
Right.
here. And I find it interesting that you have a character sketch almost immediately in the book.
And that's it. Now, in your case, you're reading the Dresden Files. That's book 6.
Book
People
6.
are familiar.
Yeah.
So if they come across that, they know. This was the first book that Chandler published, and you get a chance to meet Philip Marlowe without knowing his name in the first paragraph. That makes me want to know what this uptight PI is doing with $4 million to visit.
Yeah. How's the book end? Oh, that'll be another episode.
Yeah, that's another episode. What else do you have for us?
You know, I have a book by Neil Gaiman, The Graveyard Book, and I will teach this book usually every year because I think some of the writing is very powerful and extremely metaphorical. And
What's the basic plot on that for those who might not be familiar with Gaiman?
a baby finds its way to a graveyard and is raised by ghosts.
Okay.
So we were definitely dealing with another kind of fantasy, slightly horror type book, as Neil Gaiman tends to write. And the very first page, it's a black page that has a hand with essentially holding a knife, which is weird because the first line is, there was a hand in the darkness and it held a knife.
Okay.
And then you have to turn to the next page to even get the first paragraph. The knife had a handle of polished black bone and a blade finer and sharper than any razor. If it sliced you, you might not even know you'd been cut. Not immediately.
Interesting focus on an object,
Mm-hmm.
not a character,
Mhm.
not a description of where it is.
And-
So,
And you almost have this characterization of the knife in the first couple paragraphs because the knife is being wielded by an assassin who's in a house to take out an entire family and he can't find the baby.
but you just used the expression characterization for an object, which places a greater deal of importance upon that object.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they always used to say that, in playwriting, for example, you don't show a gun in Act 1
Right.
unless it's going to be fired in Act 3.
Shoot Chekhov.
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah,
Chekhov.
Chekhov's the role.
And that was the key element. So that knife, beyond whose hand held
Mhm.
it in the darkness, is going to be of some importance.
Oh yeah, and it definitely comes into play later in the book. So it's almost kind of a magical knife.
So right now, what we've got so far is you've got a book that has, within a series,
Mm-hmm.
that people know the character.
Right.
You basically are affirming that character by virtue of the fact it wasn't my fault in the fire.
Right, and people already know essentially the
Right.
character to where that just becomes a very natural line for the character.
You've got a book in which a new character is being introduced.
But you don't even understand him because it's essentially being led by a knife. And the thing about his character is he's always forgettable. You may see him, you will remember that you were scared by him, but you can't remember much about him.
Now, and my other example is the alternate side of Raymond Chandler, which is Dashiell Hammett, and his first book was Red Harvest. It features an unnamed operative for the Continental Detective Agency, who has been known as the Continental Op. And in this particular case, you get a description of a place, and the verbiage used is indicative of a time period, and you'll hear that. I first heard Personville called Poisonville by a red-haired mucker named Hickey Dewey and the big ship in Butte. He also called his shirt a shoit. I didn't think anything of what he had done to the city's name. Later I heard men who could manage their R's give it the same pronunciation. I still didn't see anything in it but the meaningless sort of humor that used to make Richardsonary, the thieves' word for dictionary. A few years later, I went to Personville and learned better. So now we're dealing with a place as a character
Mm-hmm.
in the same fashion that a knife is a character.
Yeah.
So we got a characterization. What have we learned? What's the best type of opening paragraph?
One that grabs the attention.
And it can be done how?
You're putting me on the spot here.
Well, yeah, you're a writer. You should be able to.
Either through characterization or through scene. something's going on, something that's going on that's going to grab the reader's attention.
Now, again, you just said characterization, and we've just seen two examples of a knife being characterized and a town being characterized. So people often want to start, writers often want to start with showing the weather.
That's right.
The person.
And what are we always told as writers never to do anymore?
Never don't talk about the weather.
Yeah, you know what I do in almost every novel?
Talk about the weather.
I talk about the weather. It's me. I mean, I always talk about the
Hey,
weather.
listen, I've got a Farmer's Almanac history of weather, and I can look it up by date and by zip code. Because if I want to know what's happening on July 4th, I want to know, was it really hot or did it have unintended rain that day?
Unintended, I like that.
I think the important thing is that you don't have to focus on a person as being the thing to grab you. It could be an item. It could be an action. It could be a location. Do you have another thing that you wanted to read from?
I do. And this is self-serving.
Well, why not? It's our podcast.
It is. But this is the book, The Saga of King Hrolf Kraki.
That sounds like something I bought in a store once.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say something you came down with one time after visiting Tahiti, but I'm glad you didn't. So, this sets up essentially a Norse saga.
Okay.
And the one thing about Norse sagas is they're very heavy with history.
Okay.
So you're talking families. A man named Halfdan and another Frodi. The two were brothers. They were the sons of a king and they ruled his kingdom. King Halfdan was mild-mannered and easygoing. He was quiet and good-natured, but King Frodi was the harshest and greediest man. King Halfdan had 3 children. 2 of them were sons. The third, a daughter named Signy, was the eldest, and she married to Jarl Sival. And at the time of the events, Halfdan's sons were young. One was named Hroar, and the other Helgi. Their foster father was named Regan, and he loved the boys deeply. Now, that's a ton of family history, but it all comes into play because Halfdan is murdered by Frodi in almost a Hamlet-style slaying. And then he decides that his sons will come after him for vengeance, so he ends up putting hits out on them.
But the point is, we have to take into account the time period that this was written, and potentially a modern publisher, editor, agent would say, well, you can't start out by saying everybody's, family and
lineage,
so forth.
yeah.
And that's the interesting point. It seems that the styles of what is significant, what's ideal for writing, have changed throughout the times based upon who was reading.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this comes closer to Numbers, or the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Numbers, I think, has got like the son of this begat, and that's an entire book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay. So that you've read, the sagas, are closer in time period to the Old Testaments, the New Testaments, where talking about family histories was important because that was the thing.
Right. And, you're looking at the lineage of kings. You're looking at kings that maybe did survive and things that maybe were close to this, but the story got embellished and we have the sagas.
Right. So that's the important thing. So focus, if you're writing something that is saga-based, fantasy, you could start off a paragraph in a contemporary novel with something like that, could you?
Yes, so very much so. I didn't, but...
I remember when the first book of the Wichita Chronicles series, The Day of Calamity, I had come up with a first paragraph before I had even written anything else in the book. And then I wrote it, and then after I wrote the first draft, I was like, you know what? As they often tell you, that should not be the first paragraph because it was dramatic.
Yeah.
It was literary. It was about theme, but it didn't have any specificity. So the sagas have a lot of specificity, the family history, but they didn't say it was a cold day and everybody was bummed out about blah, blah, blah. It starts off with something specific. A knife, visiting a millionaire, talking about a town, or how something wasn't your fault are all specifics. So, yes, it should grab you, but it should be something specific that should grab you.
Which, the interesting thing is this is very close to Hamlet. And how does Hamlet start? Something is rotten in Denmark.
And it's probably some cheese that was left out overnight, I'm sure.
Lutefisk, which I think is more Swedish, but...
Yeah, I mean, you can go up to Lindsborg, Kansas and get some lutefisk.
Get you lutefisk.
So, write something that's going to grab somebody's attention. It doesn't have to be the first line.
That's right.
If you get a good first line, God bless you.
But you know what? It always takes me back to, I don't remember the agent's name that came down and was doing critique sessions. She's passed. But she was well known for being very catty in her comments. And the first time she looked at Hell to Pay, she's reading it and she goes, well, this is fluff. You don't need this. No, this line right here. This is where you need to start it. She did a huge red line. She goes, start your book right here. Okay. She came back a year later, went and talked to her again, and I started the book there. And she started reading and goes, this is the worst first line I've ever seen. Why did you start it here? And I just kind of looked at her and sheepishly and said, you told me to. I rewrote that and pretty much threw all of her comments out the window.
And that's the one thing, too. We've always talked about criticism. If one person says something, pay attention.
Yeah.
If nobody else says anything similar, then...
Yeah, maybe just be a fluff comment.
If multiple people say the same thing...
Yeah, it's something that needs to change.
Prick your ears up and pay attention to it. We'll talk about closings on another episode.
On the next thing. Hey, if you're out there, we're getting close to Christmas. Read a book.
Read a book. And matter of fact, buy a book for somebody who reads as well.
Do you know what the Icelandic Christmas tradition is?
What is the Icelandic Christmas tradition?
To give books and you spend Christmas Eve reading.
Get out. I wish I was Icelandic.
There we go. It's kind of cold. Beautiful northern lights.
I'd like to be Icelandic in principle.
There we go.
Tiki
Read
Man,
a book. Give a book.
Tiki Man and the Viking podcast. You can reach us at tikimanviking@gmail.com.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, you want to talk about a future episode, by all means, get a hold of us.
And even pass along your favorite first paragraph.
That's right. And also, you can comment here on YouTube or the Spotify.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.
Tiki Man and the Viking podcast brought to you by Rumination of Thunder Media. The following intro and outro music was used for this media project. The music Find Them by Alexander Nakrata. Free download from filmmusic.io. License Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International.